This video was brought to you by Skillshare. The Online Safety Bill is an absolutely gargantuan piece of legislation that's been going through Parliament for a number of years now. On the surface, its purpose is just to improve internet safety. And some of the proposals within the bill are relatively uncontroversial because of this, such as tightening the rules around revenge porn and new laws criminalizing messages which encourage people to commit suicide. However, other aspects of the bill have received intense criticism. One of the most controversial parts of the bill is a section that will require social media companies to search for terrorist content and child sexual abuse, which some are worried could require the watering down or even elimination of encryption protocols. In essence, this would give governmental organizations the power to read your messages. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the bill itself, the amendments, and what impact it's likely going to have. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Social media has, in the last couple of decades, become a huge part of our lives. And for their part, the government has largely been stuck playing catch-up. Social media has the power to improve democracy, to create and sustain businesses, and to allow us to connect in ways which were previously impossible. But it can also facilitate some of the worst aspects of humanity, especially when we're looking at things like the dissemination of terrorist material and child sexual abuse images. Recognizing this challenge, the government proposed what was Section 110 and 111 of the Online Safety Bill, numbers which have now shifted, thanks to other new amendments, to become Sections 122, 123, and 124. Regardless of the exact numbering though, these amendments give additional powers to an agency called Ofcom. For those of you outside the UK, Ofcom is a regulatory agency created by the government to regulate TV and radio. If you don't like something that's been broadcast, for example, Ofcom are who you complain to. Anyway, the government wants to try and expand their powers so that they're able to issue technology notices to social media companies that are not adequately protecting their users. These notices are set to be used specifically to identify and prevent terrorist material and child sexual abuse material. Now, that obviously sounds good. Social media companies should be held accountable for issues like this. But the part that people have taken issue with is how these notices actually work. If Ofcom issue one of these notices to Meta, for example, then Meta could be required to use accredited technology to identify CSEA material, whether communicated publicly or privately by means of that service, and to swiftly take down that content. Now, on the surface, it's hard to see an issue with this. Any reasonable person would want this kind of content identified and taken down. However, privacy advocates have pointed out some pretty major issues. The UK organisation Liberty drew up a thorough document criticising this clause. For instance, they've argued that the legislation doesn't draw a line between social media and private messaging, meaning that companies like WhatsApp will be subject to these same technology notices. Now, as WhatsApp is very keen to tell you in all of their marketing these days, your messages on their service are encrypted, which means that no one, not even the police, not the government, not WhatsApp themselves, are able to read your messages. The problem is that in order to be able to comply with such a notice, companies are required to suspend their encryption protocols. If WhatsApp, for example, are issued with a notice and are required to take down terrorist material, then they can only do this by searching everyone's messages. And the only way they can do that is by removing their encryption. As Liberty puts it, the duties imposed on private messaging services by the Online Safety Bill would appear to require private companies to monitor all individuals' private messages in order to comply with their duties. Otherwise, it's unclear how they'd be able to take action in relation to particular kinds of harmful content. They then go on to specify that the most likely way this would happen is by scanning individuals' draft messages against a database of illegal material. And this would all have to happen after the user hits send, but before it's received by the intended user, in a practice that's known as client-side scanning. The issue that Liberty take with this is that they see the ability to communicate privately as most important, and they argue that a general monitoring of private messages is disproportionate and likely to be most harmful to those who rely on their ability to communicate privately. For instance, LGBTQ+ people trying to communicate in countries where it's illegal, or journalists who are criticizing repressive regimes. In an attempt to rectify this criticism, the UK government inserted an amendment in the House of Lords, which means that Ofcom can only issue a technology notice, which requires the company to search their user database for illegal material, after a so-called skilled person writes a report looking at the impact it would have on the company and individuals it was issued to. Now, the government likely believes that this will mitigate some of the concern, as the individual writing it, by necessity, would be impartial, and could demonstrate to Ofcom what the impact of their technology notice would really be. And the skilled people writing the report would additionally have to demonstrate to Ofcom the impact that such a notice would have on freedom of speech and expression, and whether there are any less intrusive technologies that could be used instead. In previous versions of the bill, commissioning of such reports was optional. Now, though, thanks to the Lord's changes, it's mandatory to do so before issuing a technology notice. However, while this might be progress, it's certainly not enough to appease privacy campaigners, as Ofcom would still have the power to simply ignore this report. All of this combined has led to a situation where some of the largest tech companies in the world have ended up criticizing the bill, and some have even threatened to withdraw their services. For instance, Apple said that encryption helps everyday citizens defend themselves against surveillance, identity theft, fraud, and data breaches. The online safety bill poses a serious threat to this protection, while WhatsApp have said that they will not comply with the bill if it means weakening encryption, with them going on to point out that 98% of their users are based outside of the UK, and, quote, "It'll be an odd choice for us to choose to lower the security of the product in a way that would affect those 98% of users." Signal, a rival to WhatsApp, also said that they couldn't comply with the rules, saying that they would absolutely 100% walk away from the UK rather than weakening security and privacy for their users. Right now, though, it looks likely that the online safety bill will become law, having already cleared the House of Commons, meaning that these social media companies will need to decide whether or not to make good on their threats. Either they'll have to stay and back down, watering down their encryption, or they leave, hurting their bottom line and shrinking their user base. It's hard to tell which is really the better option, with many questioning whether this legislation, as well-intentioned as it might be, is really the best strategy. But ultimately, we'll have to pay attention to what happens in the weeks and months ahead as it begins to be rolled out. In fact, that's probably not a bad idea more generally. Things are always changing, and it feels great to stay on top of them as they do. Even within TLDR, I've recently shifted my video editing workflow from Final Cut to Premiere in order to better integrate with the Adobe products our growing team of editors prefer. Now, when I started with YouTube, I just messed around and taught myself Final Cut. But this time round, at the advice of my team, I headed over to Skillshare to take their course on the topic. Unlike when I taught myself the first time round, I was guided through the process quickly and efficiently, and barely lost any productivity as I shifted from one tool to the other. It's not just that either. You likely already knew that Skillshare had classes for things like photography, editing, and illustration, but Skillshare also has hundreds of career-focused classes too. Now, we all know at this stage that traditional jobs aren't one size fits all. I mean, I quit my full-time job in marketing so that I could take more control and do YouTube full-time. Now, that's not necessarily the path that you want to take too, but the courses on Skillshare can help you design a career that fits you. That's courses on everything from how to start a business, growing in e-commerce, how to maximize your workflow, or the course I'm taking right now on how to build a business that lasts. And if that sounds interesting, you should use our link in the description, which gives you access to all of that for free. That's right, the first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So check it out, and thanks for supporting the channel.